Making headlines for this week of September 16th, exposing Syria. U.S.-based peace group releases findings of what they observed is really happening. FUBAR at the FBI, organization forced to admit they covered up Clinton lies. Freaky finances, the gold game the cabal hides as it manipulates. And getting ET home, former Lockheed exec confirms it is possible.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. It was said that September would be quite a month, and on this, the various multiple sources appear to be very correct. There are energetic changes affecting everyone on every level. There are geopolitical and geoeconomic events that should finally begin to show anyone that the status quo world that they once lived in no longer exists. Truth is emerging faster than an erupting volcano for those open and willing to see and hear it. From the charade of the U.S. election to mounting evidence against the Clinton Foundation and the mounting evidence that both Clinton and Trump will not make it to the election in November, and then to the increasing exposure and weakening of the cabal control worldwide, including within NATO itself, as well as the increased isolation of the U.S. and its allies. Truth is also coming this month, exposing the lies, frauds, and crimes committed by the U.S. and Western powers in Syria. In an article appearing on the Duran website on September the 3rd, it is reported that members of the U.S. Peace Council have returned from their visit to Syria and are submitting their report to the world about what is happening in that country. And their report exposes the U.S. foreign policy agenda in all its ugliness and shame. According to the article, a delegation from the U.S. Peace Council, the USPC, has recently returned to the U.S. from a fact-finding mission to Syria. The members spent 6 days meeting with Syrian government officials, including President Assad, union leaders, government opposition members, as well as civil and business leaders, NGOs, charities, and universities. The delegation stated that each member paid their own way and that the Syrian government allowed them to meet whomever they wanted. They issued their report and held a press conference at the UN on August the 9th. The following are comments made by two members of the delegation.
And thank you all for coming to hear our presentation. I'm Alfred Martyr, and I'm president of the U.S. Peace Council. It was quite evident to us over the several years that what we were hearing and reading from the press was obviously confusing the American people and the peace movement, the large, vocal anti-war movement that exists in our country. We saw the same pattern of every other invasion, where the leadership of the country was demonized and therefore used as an excuse to intervene in the internal affairs. Our organization, the U.S. Peace Council, is a firm advocate of the United Nations Charter, with deep respect for the sovereignty of all countries, respecting the rights of the peoples of those countries to determine their own destiny. It was our consideration that we had to reach out to the U.S. peace movement and ask that they participate in a delegation to Syria to see for themselves what existed, to speak to both officials and non-officials, civil society, to try to determine for themselves, independently, the situation in Syria and the road to peace. That is our responsibility. Our responsibility is to reach out first to the U.S. peace movement and then to the American people. The campaign to confuse the American people has been intense. And it is our purpose to try to bring some light, some understanding, which can perhaps lead to the American people demanding an end to the intervention. We reached out to many peace organizations in our country to try to get a broad delegation to go. I would be less than honest if I did not say that some did not come because they were fearful of going into a war zone. Others, It demonstrated the confusion that does exist because of reading the propaganda and the barrage of, unfortunately, the media, which gives such a one-sided story. We feel we have that obligation, and it's a tribute to those who went, that they overcame those obstacles and agreed to go, and may I point out, paid their own way to go. So I'd like to first introduce the co-leader of the delegation, member of the Executive Board of the U.S. Peace Council, Dr. Henry Lowenthorf.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Ambassador. Our delegation was co-led by Jerry Condon, who's the Vice President of Veterans for Peace. He's not able to be here. He's active right now in Seattle, Washington, where he lives in that area. Two other members of the delegation are unable to be here. Judy Bello, who lives in Rochester, and Vanessa Beeley, who is an independent journalist who has returned to Syria to report directly what she is seeing as she investigates further the truth of what's happening in Syria. I think what Alfred said is so true. We are fighting a mass of propaganda that has demonized the Syrian government, demonized its leaders, an effort that precedes every other intervention that the United States has made over the course of many, many decades in order to convince people that it's okay for quote-unquote humanitarian reasons to overthrow a government and to replace it with whatever. The United States prefers a government that is not independent, that is a willing participant in whatever U.S. policy is. So what we saw in Damascus and what we saw in the two villages we visited outside Damascus belies the propaganda that has overwhelmed us. It's hard for even those of us who have been in the peace movement for a long time. It's hard for us to ignore this propaganda. It is so well orchestrated. We spoke to members of industry, the Chamber of Industry. We spoke to leaders in the student union, the National Student Union. We spoke with NGOs that are involved in taking care of the orphans of those who have died in this war on both sides. They don't discriminate. Orphans are orphans, whatever side they were fighting on. These young people have to be taken care of. We spoke with an NGO that trains women who don't have a skill in sewing because they lost the breadwinner in their family. We spoke to an NGO where they're trying to deal with reconciliation and trying to make sure that supplies get to those areas of the country that are under the control of the terrorists, the mercenaries. And we make a distinction between the political opposition, with whom we also met, and the terrorists and the mercenaries with whom we did not meet. We met people in Syria who work nonviolently to bring about change. We learned of their efforts to bring about change, working in opposition to the government, working with the government, but nonviolently. We met with government officials. We met with the Minister of Administration. We met with the Ministry of Health. We met with the Minister of Reconciliation, a whole approach to bringing back those Syrians who have, for one reason or another, joined the mercenaries and the terrorists. And my fellow delegates will speak, I think, about some of the details of these. But I want to give you just an overview of whom we met with. We saw for ourselves the damage that was done to the university. Even while we were there, a shell fell into the School of Architecture, killing students and faculty. And the students themselves were rebuilding the damage. We saw villages that are basically Christian villages that have been besieged by the terrorists but have now been liberated. And the damage done to a shrine in a village called Malula, which is a village where they still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus. There are two things I want to mention finally that we feel are really important. One is that while the United States would like to divide the Syrians up by religion or within a religion by the different beliefs within that religion, there wasn't a Syrian we talked to who would accept that. We spoke to the Grand Mufti and he said, people ask me how many Muslims there are in Syria, and his response is always 23 million. That's the population of Syria. And when we talked to the bishop of one of the Orthodox churches, he answered the same thing. The number of Christians is 23 million. We will not allow ourselves to be divided up the way the United States has divided up the people of Iraq or Libya or Afghanistan or so many other countries. We won't allow that. And that unity, I believe, has led to the ability of the Syrians to withstand an invasion by the most powerful country in the world and its most powerful allies in Europe, its most powerful allies in the Middle East, with what is a vicious attack on the Syrian people. The second is the sanctions. I have to admit that I did not know before I went that the United States has imposed sanctions on Syria in a way that's similar to the sanctions that the United States imposed on Iraq in the 1990s in order to weaken that country and that government that the United States admits killed 500,000 children in Iraq during the 1990s sanctions. That set of sanctions means that the Syrian people cannot get medicines that they desperately need. They cannot get factory parts that they need to maintain their economy. They can't get infant formula and many other things. Their students cannot go abroad. Their lawyers are separated from the rest of the international legal system because of those sanctions. These sanctions are not reported in the U.S. media, to my knowledge, and we need to know about them. Another way to weaken these sanctions, or another way to weaken the Syrian government and the Syrian state. So that's my overview.
A few other representatives also shared some comments. According to the article, Madeleine Hoffman, executive director of the New Jersey Peace Action, was quoted as saying that this is not a civil war in Syria. That's probably the first thing we heard, and we heard it over and over again. It is not President Assad against his own people. It is President Assad and the Syrian people, all together in unity against outside forces, outside mercenary forces, terror organizations. The names change every day or every other day to try to protect their identity and maybe keep the connection between the country that funded it and that group kind of a little bit more nebulous. But there are groups, mercenary forces, supported by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, United States, and underneath it, Israel, the state of Israel. And these outside mercenary forces are the ones that are terrorizing the Syrian people and are attempting to divide the Syrian people. What may seem somewhat amazing and incredible to some people is how Syrians reflect the spirit of unity and oneness by saying that everyone is Muslim and that everyone is Christian. They do not separate. What is also amazing is how willing this U.S.-based organization is in admitting what its own government is doing, and this may be a reflection of the energies that are emerging at this time. More and more are finding the courage and confidence to speak the truth because the people of the world are now finding the awareness and then the courage to demand it. CVN aired a short video clip about 2 years ago now, I think, where President Obama told the people what they needed to do if they wanted change, and that was to demand that their politicians act. When enough people demand that the politicians act, they will have to, said Obama. It was almost as though he was begging the American people to wake up and begin exercising their voices and power, because this would then help him in his role. Only now is the world beginning to see the true colors of what the United States and its allies have been standing for, and it certainly has not been for freedom and democracy around the world. The strategies described about Syria, how Syria has been intentionally targeted, reflects similar strategies used in other countries, and this includes Ukraine. Although the Ukraine campaign was, unfortunately, more successful than the Western campaign in Syria. A separate article from the same website on September 3rd by Vaughn Famularo explains why the conflict in Syria is not a civil war, despite what the Western media is attempting to sell. Famularo writes that each delegate who spoke made the point that President Assad is elected democratically and that the Syrian people hold President Assad and his government in high regard, and also point out that this is the main reason why Syria has been able to withstand 5 years of bloody war. The Assad government is recognized by the United Nations, and all elections that have been held in Syria have been monitored by international observers who have been satisfied that they have met all international standards. Another member of the U.S. Peace Council delegation mentioned in this second article, Joe Jameson, started out his report on what he saw by quoting Mark Twain. "It is not what we don't know that gets us into trouble. What gets us into trouble is what we think we know for sure, which just ain't so." The article writes that Jameson was blunt in his assessment and likened this quote to the dangerous attitude of so many Americans who think they know about Syria and President Assad. But what they think they know just ain't so. In his opinion, the U.S. motive is to destroy Syria as an independent secular Arab state and make it compliant to U.S. interests and policies, like Iraq and Libya have become since the U.S. invasions and bombings of these two countries. Just like Libya before the NATO bombing, Syria has universal free health care and free education from child care through to university. In contrast, he said, that Syrian Islam is a socially inclusive and a pluralistic form of Islam. They are democratic and humane. This would explain, therefore, why Syria is being targeted so extensively right now, because if the world were to learn about the inclusive nature of Syrian Islam, it would likely lead to the collapse of the message the Western media has been trying to market, that all Islam is a threat to the world. Madeleine Hoffman, mentioned in the last article, was also quoted in this article as saying that it is a war of the Syrian people, all of them against foreign mercenaries who are funded and trained by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and Israel. These mercenaries are trained in Qatar and move into Syria freely through the Turkish border. The other major story they shared was the generally unreported sanctions that the U.S. has imposed upon the Syrian people. The U.S. government claims the sanctions target the Syrian government. However, they are actually aimed at wearing down the resolve of the Syrian people, as you heard moments ago in the audio clip. Famularo closes with the following. The same scenario was acted out in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, and now Syria, invaded and bombed into submission without any politician, general, or complicit media representative tried or held to account. There is not even an acceptance of error or a conciliatory voice of remorse. Maybe this void of responsibility explains the general feeling of mental and spiritual numbness that seems to emanate from the general public in the West towards anything related to Western foreign policy. This numbness manifests itself in a collective shrugging of the shoulders when it comes to any foreign policy debate. The pattern will, however, continue until Western public opinion finally stirs itself. In the meantime, the confusion within the U.S. anti-war movement and the inactivity and indolence this has led to shows why the advocates of war in the U.S. and the West are being given a free pass. Although tragic that human history has been full of activity of this nature, it is incredibly exciting to start seeing so much information coming forth to validate what so many around the world have been trying to share to help humanity awaken and begin co-creating a new Earth and a new human and planetary consciousness. For many, the ride is only beginning, and perhaps, finally, some of us may be able to find some validation as people begin to realize that those of us labeled as crazy, insane, or conspiracy theorists, or even as terrorists in the past, were actually more sane than the rest of humanity. The full video of the presentation with comments by other members of the delegation will appear in the show summary. In other geopolitical news, there is perhaps a bit of an irony unfolding with regard to Russia. For several years, the Western media and Western governments have been attempting to demonize Russia and blame Russia for all that they claim has been going on and going wrong in the world. The West has imposed sanctions on Russia, just as they did in Syria, but both countries have been strong enough in their collective political will to not cave in to Western pressure and control tactics. The Western media usually have not missed any attempt to make Russia look bad. As we approach the Russian national election on September 18th, one might expect the Western media would be taking almost every political shot that they can to demonize Russia and externally influence public opinion on the outcome. Yet, there appears to be a very odd silence on the Western front. An article appearing on the Duran website by Adam Gary on September 15th writes the following. With Russian State Duma elections only 3 days away, the Western media, usually so hungry for a Russian hit piece when there's no celebrities to scandalize or a natural disaster to pretend to care about, the media has remained almost totally silent about them. Gary offers his insights on why this may be the case. He writes that, 1, Russia's elections will be free and fair, and the Western media cannot just come out with a headline such as, rigged Russian election days away. 2, of course, the Western media could always lie about the nature of the elections like they often do about Russia. However, despite the faltering establishment in politics, and despite the old media demonization of Putin, the court of public opinion appears to strongly support Russia. Many recent world developments have proved that Russia cannot be faulted for the crime of running a successful independent state. Also, helping to restore peace in the Middle East has won Russia affection from many who otherwise don't pay attention to any stories about Russia, be they true or otherwise. 3, finally and most importantly, contented countries have boring elections. Gary also writes that throughout modern electoral history, important elections are generally ones that come during a time of turbulence, not during times of stability and broad contentment. He offers several examples historically, including the British elections of 1945 and the late 1970s, as well as the Russian election in 1993. Gary notes, however, that since 1993, the tables of stability have turned. Britain now has a constitutional crisis of her own due to Brexit, whilst the US is facing the most confrontational presidential election in its recent memory. Russia, on the other hand, is stable. The troublemakers of the 90s have faded into political oblivion, and the parties that will either retain or expand their vote shares vis-à-vis the previous elections held in 2011, are those led by familiar faces with political programs that all promote different versions of stability within Russia's existing political framework. On the Kremlin website, President Putin wrote a statement to the people of Russia ahead of the election. He wrote that the election campaign is almost over now. All participants have had equal conditions for open and fair competition and the opportunity to set out their views on different problems and present solutions. Voters have had the chance to objectively assess and compare the different parties and candidates' programs, goals, and actions. The State Duma election is a big event in our life. It is entirely up to you, the citizens of Russia, to decide and shape our new parliament. I am sure that we will all want to bring into the State Duma people who are worthy, competent, energetic, and honest, who will carry out the people's will, live up to the voters' trust, ensure stability, development, and national harmony, and will be ready to stand up in unity for Russia's interests. I am sure that no matter what our political views, participation in the voting is the civic duty of each and every one of us and an expression of our sincere feelings for our country and concern for its future. Peter Lavelle, in a separate article for the Duran on September the 11th, writes that Hillary Clinton refuses to discuss real issues and calls anyone who doesn't support her a Putin agent or useful idiot. She has lied and obfuscated for her entire political career, but video strongly suggesting she has serious health issues can't be so easily spun away. He then closes with the following: "Given how Hillary has run her campaign, rest assured she still has her favorite card up her sleeve. When will Hillary Clinton blame Vladimir Putin for fainting at the 9/11 ceremony?" Returning to the Gary article, Gary closes with the following: "One can't help but laugh at the crazed lies and odd omissions in the Western media. Russia is just too stable to make the elections in one of the world's largest and most important countries newsworthy. But the good news for the West is that if they want political uncertainty, scandal, lies, and rigged elections, they only need to open their front door." The Russian political system has undergone numerous changes over the last few years, and of course there are those who argue the changes have been beneficial, while others argue against that point. For those interested in learning a bit about the history of the political system in Russia, an article from the Global Security website will be in the show summary, although I cannot say whether this site is biased in its comments. It was mentioned in the first story moments ago how Ukraine has been influenced in much the same way Syria has. Russell Bentley is a former U.S. Marine who now fights for the Donbass, eastern Ukraine, against the U.S.-funded Ukrainian army. He has a news website known as Fort Russ. In an article on September 9th, the website wrote the following: "Ukraine's puppet president Poroshenko," and Poroshenko was born Waltzman, and Victoria Nuland, who was born Noodleman, Assistant Secretary of the State Department, both are in cahoots over the situation in eastern Ukraine. Poroshenko receives an incredible amount of U.S. funds to arm his weak army that is charged with carrying out ethnic genocide against civilians in eastern Ukraine who are pro-Russian. Many of these Ukrainian soldiers are Slavs that have been brainwashed by the cabal. This is a war that is literally brothers killing their own brothers. Meanwhile, Western mainstream media spins the opposite story, that it is Russia not fulfilling the Minsk agreements, which forbid heavy fire, among other things. But Russia is not party to the Minsk agreement. Only Kiev and the leaders of the Donbass are. The only way this story works is when the Western viewer is told that there is a Russian invasion in Ukraine. It is common sense that if that was true, Kiev would not be standing today. Pondering the origins of their names, it is very difficult not to get mired into the Zionist discussion. Why does this group of people feel entitled to the earth? The majority of us strive to cooperate and live in peace with all the peoples of the world. Russians, Americans, it doesn't matter. As with so many geopolitical issues at this time, it is increasingly harder to avoid the Zionist issue. And just like CVN, Russell notes that there is a need to distinguish between Zionism and Jews, because just as there are Muslims and radicals, as well as European Christians and white supremacists, my comments, and this is Bentley speaking, Bentley's comments concern only the Zionist cabal and should not be taken out of context. Russell continues, "America has been taken hostage. This group of people will have the feeble-minded citizens of the world running around in circles arguing with one another. In the end, it is your taxpayer dollar, dear hardworking American citizen, that is funding these wars, instead of funding your schools, roads, and infrastructure. Imagine what $5 billion could fix in your own country without the hegemony." Russians and Americans have much more in common than we have things to fight about. So when will you take your country back, asks Bentley. When will you understand that you live in a hamster wheel based on fabricated ideas? As the truth of this continues to come out, There is now the next weapon of mass distraction happening in the U.S. with the controversy surrounding the U.S. national anthem as being systemically racist, and how sporting figures are now choosing not to stand during the anthem. Yet, there is the continuing propaganda surrounding the flag, or the anthem. While soldiers commit suicide in increasingly larger numbers that are unreported in the U.S. media, some soldiers are resorting to YouTube videos to confess their crimes while trying to relieve some of the trauma and guilt they are experiencing as they realize the real reasons they have been sent overseas. Reasons that apply to soldiers of any Western country, for they are the very same reasons. Yet, a Business Insider story from May of 2015 reported how the Pentagon paid 14 NFL teams over $5.4 million to salute the troops. Very convenient how the global cabal members in the U.S. can manipulate the public by changing the focus of their agenda for global domination into a campaign for honoring the troops, when the troops themselves are becoming increasingly aware of the lies they find themselves signed up for. Over the last few months, as the charade of the U.S. election has unfolded, and as increasing evidence is revealed related to the distraction of Clinton's use of an insecure server for emails to cover for alleged crimes committed by the Clinton Foundation, the U.S. public and the world has witnessed at least a few U.S. politicians who are beginning to answer the call of the people and begin challenging those in the corridors of power who are connected to wealthy and very protected interests, also within those corridors of power. Trey Gowdy is one representative who has been taking Clinton to account for her use of a private email server. A YouTube video was posted on September 16th, showing a specific moment in a congressional hearing where Jason Chaffetz makes the FBI admit that they covered up Hillary's lies. The YouTube description writes the following: "Not only did Chaffetz give the FBI agent ample time to dig himself out of the hole, he proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that the FBI is hiding things from Congress that would be devastating to the Clinton campaign. In a move that seems to be very unusual for a congressional hearing, Chaffetz publicly serves a subpoena to the FBI spokesperson and to secure information that the FBI is believed to be hiding from Congress."
What does Congress not have the right to see?
So I don't know if I can answer that in a way that I think there's more to it than a simple answer.
No. Wait. I'm asking you a philosophical question here. What does Congress not have the right to see?
I think that each case is sort of specific to its own set of facts. I think Director Comey tried to be as transparent as he could with this committee.
Do you think he could be
other committees as he responsibly can be? So I think when he spoke and he answered questions.
Wait. What is it that I, as a member of Congress, or any member on this Congress, either side of the aisle, what is it that you believe we don't have the right to see? See, this is the way our government works. We get to do oversight. That's why since 1814 this committee has been doing that. There's executive privilege. Let me help you. There's executive privilege. Has the president invoked executive privilege in this case?
No.
The answer is no. Good. That's right. The answer is no. Is there any other situation?
Look, when it comes to classified information and the classification that deals in the executive order, not all the information that we have in our files belongs to us. We defer to other agencies when it comes to access to their classified information.
But you are the ones that put redactions on personal identifiable information, correct?
We did on the personal identifiable information, that's correct.
Where in the Constitution does it say that I can't see that?
Does it address it specifically in the Constitution?
So, can you cite any legal case, any precedent that says that Congress can't look at personal identifiable information?
I cannot cite any legal case.
Are you aware that Congress is exempt from the Privacy Act?
I am.
Does the FBI treat congressional document requests as FOIA requests?
No.
Will the FBI provide Congress all of the 302s?
All of the 302s, we have one set that you've been provided already. The rest of them are coming through the FOIA process.
Wait.
Yep.
We're not, FOIA process. You mean I got to fill out a FOIA request?
You can. Not necessary.
When, here's the problem. You handpicked the 302s to give to us. My understanding of discussion with staff, and I appreciate your accessibility with the staff. You've been good, and you're new, and for your first time hearing, this is a tough one, but the reality is you should give us all the 302s.
So let me say this. I think the director made principled decisions about what to say to Congress when he was here and also what to provide to Congress. As far as
Wait, where do I find that?
Personally identified.
Do we just let everybody in government decide that they're based on their own individual principles? That's what see, it's trust but verify is how it works. You don't get to decide what I get to see. I get to see it all. I was elected by some 800,000 people to come to Congress and see classified information. I was elected by my colleagues here to be the chairman of this committee. That's the way our Constitution works. Will the FBI provide to Congress the full file with no redactions of personal identifiable information?
I cannot make that commitment sitting here today.
Then I'm going to issue a subpoena, and I'm going to do it right now. So let's go. I've signed this subpoena. We want all the 302s, and we would like the full file. You can accept service on behalf of the FBI?
Certainly.
You are hereby served. We have a duty and a responsibility. You can cite no precedent, nothing in the Constitution, no legal precedent. You know this is important to us. You now have your subpoena. We would all like to see this information.
What this would seem to suggest is that there are apparently some individuals within the U.S. government who are beginning to take their power more seriously and are beginning to realize that if they want to remain in their positions, they are going to have to start being more responsive to the demands of the public in pursuit of truths that have been hidden and suppressed from them. In light of this, another article by Victoria McGrain from the Boston Globe on September 15th has reported that the Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren sent a letter to FBI Director James Comey on Thursday demanding he release notes and other documents the Bureau has on its investigations into individuals accused of contributing to the devastating 2008 financial crisis. Her argument, the FBI broke its long-standing practice of keeping its investigation notes private when it released dozens of pages of documents related to its investigation of Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server as Secretary of State. The FBI did so, Warren notes, claiming it was in the public interest to be more transparent in that particular case. According to Warren, if Secretary Clinton's email server was of sufficient interest to establish a new FBI standard of transparency, then surely the criminal prosecution of those responsible for the 2008 financial crisis should be subject to the same level of transparency. After all, according to the article, millions of Americans lost wealth, jobs, and homes during the financial crisis. In a similar but unrelated story, a story appearing on the New Observer Online website on August 16th has reported a lawsuit that has been filed in U.S. courts over illegal U.S. aid to Israel. The article writes that legal history was made that week in a Washington, D.C. federal court when several senior U.S. government figures, including Barack Obama, were named as respondents in a suit filed over America's ongoing illegal aid to Israel. The billions of dollars of aid which the U.S. provides to Israel is illegal in terms of a 1976 law which forbids aid to any nuclear-armed state which has not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The article also notes that Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but is a known nuclear power and recipient of U.S. aid. Submitted by Grant Smith, director of the Institute for Research, Middle Eastern Policy, MEP, a D.C. nonprofit organization, The lawsuit says that the United States has given Israel an estimated $234 billion in foreign aid since Congress passed the International Security Assistance and Arms Export Control Act of 1976. The IRMEP lawsuit comes just after, or rather just before, the Obama regime signs a new deal that will boost U.S. aid to the Jews-only state by between $1 billion and $2 billion per year over a decade. Israel already gets $3 billion a year in U.S. aid. Apart from the U.S. government, the lawsuit names John O'Brennan, director of the CIA, Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter, Secretary of State John Kerry, Secretary of the U.S. Treasury Jack Lew, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy Ernest Moniz, and Secretary of the U.S. Department of Commerce Penny Pritzker. According to the lawsuit, this lawsuit is not about foreign policy. It is about the rule of law, presidential power, the structural limits of the U.S. Constitution, and the right of the public to understand the functions of government and informed petition of the government for redress. More details are in the article, which will be available in the show summary for the story. The article closes with this note. This is the first time that a federal court application of this nature has been made, and its progress, or lack of progress, through the court system will serve as a potent indicator of the remaining power of the Jewish lobby in Washington, D.C. Does the global cabal still wield that much power in Washington? This may very well be the legal case to watch to find out. In financial news for the week, although there are sources that appear to be ringing alarm bells with regard to the global economic system, the level-headed people will understand that the old paradigm is merely transitioning into a new paradigm, and that there are certain interests who know how to profit excessively from the fear of ordinary people, and investors who do not fully understand the nature of the changes unfolding at this time and how everything is interconnected. There appear to be events unfolding at a rapid pace, but the challenge is that some sites are reporting one thing, while others report nothing or something different. Take, for example, a story on the Investment Research Dynamics website. It was reported on September 15th that at 8:30 a.m. this morning, 10 minutes after the COMEX gold pit opens, over 70 tons of paper gold was dropped into the entire COMEX trading system. If this happened on the New York Stock Exchange or one of the ECNs, this would have mysteriously broke and trading would have been halted before the damaging effects of the systemic paper overload hit the market. Keep in mind that this was allegedly paper gold and not physical gold. Longtime CVN listeners have been expecting and patiently waiting for the transformation of the old economic paradigm to the new economic paradigm. And the trick is to see what things were starting to happen publicly that sources have been claiming about quietly in various alternative news channels, websites, and other social media. The contradiction, however, appears to be this. One other website that many listeners follow for financial information is a site called Zero Hedge. In searching this site for September 15th and 16th, it appears that this news site did not report any such activity on the COMEX market on the morning of the 15th. It is possible I could have missed it, but I did not find any report on massive gold activity on this site on those dates. Therefore, it is unclear whether or not this really happened, or whether it is a source connected to George Soros who is attempting to influence a market event by putting out a message that may or may not be true. It is important to not simply trust one source the moment one comes across a piece of information that happens to support one's current view of the world. This is why I keep encouraging listeners to not blindly share any story they come across without first searching as far back as possible to find the original date of the story and to see whether other websites are also covering the same story. Certain sites will post certain information while other sites may not. and this may give one hint as to whether or not there is truth to the story being reported. Learning to listen to one's own heart and intuition about a story is also key. What also appears to be happening this week are several stories being reported via the King World News website. KWN and its sources tend to be a bit more fearful in their assessments of what's happening in the global economy, so discernment is required. It is important to look for the important hints and then put those hints into context with other sources describing what is going on. On September the 11th, and I admit this story may have been planted for this particular date, Egon von Greyers was quoted on KWN as saying, "The autumn of 2016 has for some time looked like a period when dark clouds will move in over the world economy. Therefore, it was not surprising to see the first sign of things to come in the next few months. In one day, the Dow erased all the gains since early July with an almost 400-point fall. Since the beginning of the year, the Dow is now up a pitiful 2.6%. Almost 8 years of zero interest rates have not managed to revive the U.S. economy nor the global economy. In this century, the Dow is up 57%, which on the surface appears to be an excellent return over 16 years. But it must be remembered that we have seen an unprecedented period of money printing and credit creation in the last 16 years." Von Greyers also notes that whether we talk about Greek, Spanish, French, Italian, or German banks, their balance sheets are all lumbered with billions of toxic assets, with the only buyer being the European Central Bank. This is why the current ECB printing program will not end in March 2017, but instead accelerate. But as we all know, printed money can never save the financial system. All it will achieve is to increase the debt burden and create hyperinflation. Von Greyers later states that people will be scared as their investments disintegrate without offering any kind of hope of the changes that will replace what has been lost. There are things I do not completely agree with in what he shares, but it is important for listeners to have access to examples of this information so they can learn how to discern, but more importantly, how to critically question things that are going on while keeping those tidbits of truth to help them move forward. Also on the 11th, Gerald Celente, also a regular commentator on KWN, warned of increased fiscal stimulus that will lead to shockwaves through global financial markets. I could be wrong, but what I think may be happening is that these stories may be weapons of mass distraction, while other changes are taking place. Please do not take my word for this, however. Michael Krieger, in an interview with Greg Hunter of USAWatchdog.com, told Hunter on the 11th that a financial extinction level event is on the horizon. On September 15th, King World News claims to have received an email from a source stating the following: "Yes, the establishment will allow gold to take off, and it will be by design. For what it's worth, that is why they play so many head games with people on the price, because they don't want people to buy gold or even continue to hold gold that they already own." KWN adds that gold is going to re-enter the monetary system. This discussion has already been underway for some time. KWN has stated for many, many years that this day is coming, as has CVN. The first thing that has happened is the Chinese yuan has been included in the SDR basket. At some point, gold will also be included, but only on the establishment's timetable. From now until then, the establishment has instructed their agents, the bullion banks, to scare the hell out of anyone who goes near the gold market and mentally exhaust those who are already in it. In a separate KWN article, a former associate of George Soros claims that gold will go to $2,000 per ounce, and likely even higher, but it will only be when the establishment allows it. There is something about that claim that does not feel quite right with me personally, but that is only my personal feeling. So what we can say we know for sure is that there are definitely things happening on the geoeconomic stage, and we know that they are leading to something pretty big. Otherwise, the distraction and the financial fear-mongering would not be so intense at this time. What we do not know is exactly what will unfold, how it will unfold, and when it will unfold. At some time or another, most people have played the game musical chairs, or at least are familiar with the concept. A group of people walking around a group of chairs that is always one less than the number of people walking around. People walk as the music plays. When the music stops, there is a rush to get a seat, and the one who does not get a seat is eliminated from the game, and another chair is also removed. Zero Hedge asked the question on September the 12th, did the music just stop on September 9th? Apparently referring to a massive decline in global interest in purchasing stocks, bonds, and more, perhaps referring to other derivatives. Zero Hedge also reported on the 16th, perhaps as an example of the music stopping, that Deutsche Bank bonds were dropping like a stone as most dangerous bank in the world plummets. The article noted that the decline came after the German lender received a $14 billion claim from the U.S. Justice Department to settle an investigation into the firm's sale of residential mortgage-backed securities. They are dropping like a stone, said Thomas Kinmonth, a credit strategist at ABN AMRO Bank in Amsterdam. The fine, even if reduced, could surpass all provisions held by the bank. In a separate article, Zero Hedge noted that Deutsche Bank shares also went down dramatically after the CEO rejected the $14 billion settlement. Whatever is going on appears to be impacting the markets in some way, suggesting further that maybe the music has stopped. Zero Hedge reported on the 16th that the gloves finally came off. After tactfully warning clients for months that staying invested in U.S. stocks and bonds is an unacceptable risk, overnight, Goldman's Peter Oppenheimer finally changed Goldman's official tactical bias, and as of this moment recommends selling not only bonds, but has also downgraded the S&P 500 and Europe's Stock 600 due to elevated valuations across assets and the risk of shocks. I'm not the best person to explain what all of this means in detail. I'm just here to give you some of what's being reported and offer links in the show summary so those who are interested can take from this information whatever is important and hopefully use it to help humanity and our planet in a better way. In general news, music fans in Canada and some around the world who are familiar with the Tragically Hip will know that lead singer of the group Gord Downie was diagnosed last May with glioblastoma, a form of cancer that begins in the brain. It was about a week later that the group announced a series of farewell concerts, with the last two concerts taking place in Canada's capital city, Ottawa, and then finally in the home city of the group, Kingston, Ontario. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was invited to attend this concert, and Downie acknowledged the presence of the Prime Minister and called upon him to do better in addressing the issues facing Canada's Indigenous populations. Although Downie diplomatically stated publicly that Trudeau would do it, an article appearing on the Aboriginal People's TV network website on September the 9th suggests Downie has a message of his own in support of Indigenous people across Canada. The article writes that Canada is not the country many think it is, says ailing Tragically Hip singer Gord Downie, who is releasing a solo album based on the story of Shani Wenjack, a First Nation boy from Martin Falls First Nation who was found dead on the railroad tracks near Kenora, Ontario after fleeing the Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School in October of 1966. The Hip frontman, who is suffering from terminal brain cancer, released a statement following the visit saying most Canadians had a misconception of the country. He said they were never told about the dark reality the country is built on, that is built on the broken bones and bodies of First Nation children and communities. Downie was also quoted as saying that, "We are not the country we thought we were. History will be rewritten. We are all accountable, but this begins in the late 1800s and goes to 1996. White Canada knew, on somebody's purpose, nothing about this. We weren't taught this information in school. It was hardly ever mentioned, said Downey in a statement. All of those governments and all of those churches for all of those years misused themselves. They hurt many children. They broke up many families. They erased entire communities. It will take 7 generations to fix this. 7. 7 is not arbitrary. The article also added that the singer said his project also aims to spread the message of the former chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Murray Sinclair, who said that this is not an Aboriginal problem, it's a Canadian problem. Canada is a country that loves to tell the world how open and advanced they are when it comes to human rights, but the truth is that Canada is no better in its treatment of its own citizens, whether they are Indigenous or non-Indigenous. Governments love to make claims on one level, but there are problems that go much deeper than merely an issue of human rights, and there are many dots that need to be connected to fully understand the issue. This is reflected in an interview that appeared on an Iranian news website regarding a paper written by a Canadian professor. According to this article, regarding human rights violations, the US and Canada have no lessons to give. Their jails are overcrowded with citizens. The bail system systematically denies constitutional rights. Physical isolation that amounts to torture is widely used. Jail sentences are disproportionate, and there is no rehabilitation. The police summarily attack and murder Black, Aboriginal, and economically excluded citizens on the streets and in detention. Denis G. Rancourt is a former tenured and full professor of physics at the University of Ottawa, Canada. He is known for his applications in physics education research. Rancourt has published over 100 articles in leading scientific journals and has written several social commentary essays. He is the author of the book Hierarchy and Free Expression in the Fight Against Racism. While he was at the University of Ottawa, he supported student activism and opposed the influence of the Israeli lobby at that institution, which fired him under false pretexts in 2009. Rancourt gave an exclusive interview with the news site, addressing questions relating to Canada's arms deal with Saudi Arabia, Canada's involvement in Syria and Iraq, and his support of Palestine and more. The link in the show summary has the full interview and his responses. Relating more to the Indigenous issue of human rights, however, it is clear that this is an issue that governments do not want fully addressed. To understand why, perhaps one could think about the following expression: if peace was profitable, you can be sure that we would have it in the world by now. An article appearing on the CBC News website in Canada on September 11th, back in 1995, asked the question about how to resolve land claims. The link has a video report from that year that anyone interested can view in the show summary. It was called Aboriginal Treaty Rights: How Do We Resolve Land Claims? Observe what the report shares even back in 1995, and then observe how almost nothing has changed in 21 years. In this interview, the CBC host is asking a former chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Ovid Mercredi, to comment on violence at Gustafson Lake and Ipperwash, an issue that has been mentioned in earlier Mohawk updates on this newscast. Observe how the host tries to keep the blame focused on Indigenous people, and note Mercredi's comment to the host at the end.
First Nations Chief Ovid Mercredi spent today in Ipperwash, Ontario, at the funeral of the Native protester shot by police. I spoke with him this afternoon, and I asked him to describe the atmosphere in Ipperwash.
Well, it was a sad day for the family, and I think a time for reflection for all of us.
Can you, from your point of view, describe what was going on there today?
It was very moving, and I think, as I said earlier, I think today people realize that we have to do things differently than the way things are being done right now with respect to Indian rights.
This aggression, this confrontation seems to be dragging on, and now there's the additional sorrow of a lost life. Do you see any kind of resolution ahead? Is one possible?
Well, I think one is possible if the white politicians get involved. You see, we don't want to see any more of these funerals to bury our dead. I myself, I don't want to spend the rest of my life being a mediator because of conflicts having to do with disputes on Indian rights.
And tell me about this mediation process. What is it you're facing? Who are those people at the barricades?
Well, first of all, the issue there is not the people in the barricades, because their version of the story, I think, once the independent inquiry set up, will be verified. That they claim that they were not armed. They are very adamant about that.
But you have called them outsiders. Do you condone or do you condemn their action?
Don't get controversial with me. I don't appreciate that. If you want to be controversial, do it by yourself. The fact of the matter is that there's rights involved here, and that the Premier of the province of Ontario has to get involved. Ultimately, the answer is with him as to whether or not there's a resolution to this dispute here. But ultimately, the decision as to the future of that land depends on the Premier of your province, and he cannot carry on with the policy that Indian rights will be dealt with to the very end. That's not acceptable to us as Indian people.
Without wanting to be controversial, sir, you are also the chief, and I would like to know why it is your people are not listening to you.
Well, I'm not sure that's the case. I think that's what the media are suggesting, that people are not listening to me. But if you look at Gustafson, people say I failed there. I beg to differ.
And there are so many important things to talk about, like land claims, like the difficult social health problems many Native people face. What I was trying to get at was, aren't these people at the barricades hijacking the process and undermining your credibility and your authority?
I think what they're saying, and that's what I'm saying, that this is a wake-up call for Canada. I think, in fact, what they're saying is that the process is too slow, that the results are not there, that young people are still dying, that unemployment in our communities is still too high, that the housing conditions are too deplorable, that our issues with respect to treaty rights are not being respected, and our land issues are being ignored. And I think what, in fact, they're saying is get on with the issues and find the resolutions. But what I'm trying to suggest to you is this, that the Indian leadership has been very determined to try to find the resolutions, but we're only one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is your politicians. They're the ones who have the power to decide whether or not something will be settled. And ultimately, they have the supreme responsibility of acting in the interest of everybody, not just for their population, but for our people as well.
These are no longer, I think, they cannot any longer be seen as isolated incidents. This is a pattern now. Do you think, especially now, there is a martyr, a fuse has been lit, and there are powder kegs on reserves across this country ready to blow?
Well, I don't think so. I think the fact of the matter is that what has happened here is that people are being put in a position of evaluating what is going on in relation to the exercise of our rights, and that a decision has to be made as to whether or not we want to proceed on a more militant course or a more steady course of negotiations. And my position and the position of the chiefs is that we still have to give peace a chance, and that negotiations is still the best route to take. But for that call to have merit, your politicians have to believe in it, and they have to meet with us. For example, your Premier can't say to us, I won't meet with you. I mean, that just puts my entire argument out the window by suggesting that peace is still possible.
To what degree do you agree with your predecessor, George Erasmus, who said you better deal with the leadership today because you may have to deal with a much more angry, volatile, violent native tomorrow?
Well, I think to some extent George was fairly prophetic in his assessment of what could happen if the frustrations level get high. Now, the frustration level is high, but it doesn't mean that we cannot diffuse it. And it does not mean that the frustration level has to remain at that extreme height. But we are trying to do what we can as Indian leaders to find a non-violent resolution to our disputes. And ultimately, the responsibility still rests on the side of your leaders to do the same. They can't just sit back and say, I'll let the police handle it. This is not a police matter.
Can I ask you candidly about your frustrations?
Well, the only frustration I have is with this interview, and that's about it.
Well, then we'll end it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Government and media love to make an issue about how difficult it is to find a solution for Indigenous people. In fact, they will make this claim about almost any group in trying to resolve problems in any given society. Resolving treaty rights with any group, but particularly in the case of Canada's Indigenous population, becomes very easy once the root source of the problem is fully understood. Non-Indigenous Canadians were tricked into surrendering their rights and freedoms through two primary criminally fraudulent institutions: the debt-based system of fractional reserve banking, or money created out of thin air, and also the commercial system of admiralty law that creates commercial rules and given them the force of law, and then forced these rules upon people without their informed democratic consent. Indigenous people at that time did not understand commercial admiralty law, and they demanded to be treated as well as other Canadians. The Government of Canada was happy to do so, and they created a corporate entity known as the Assembly of First Nations. And this entity consisted of so-called elected officials who were supposed to represent the interests of Indigenous people across the land. They will argue that they did this. There might also be truth to this, but there is at least one very large problem. The Indigenous people were turned into corporate entities, just as all Canadians are. The government created and enforced a corporate piece of legislation known as the Indian Act that imposed commercial rules upon Indigenous people without their informed consent. When one begins to understand all this, resolving land claims becomes much easier. Before any land claims can be fairly settled, the root source, the group of people behind the creation and enforcement of corporate commercial rules and the corporate legislation must first be removed from the process. In fact, for anything to be dealt with fairly, these interests must first be removed. For those who have moved and have had to deal with corporate contracts relating to moving, you will know the difficulties in dealing with these entities. I am dealing with them now, helping my mother to move to a new place, and it is an almost endless exercise in frustration at how companies will attempt to extort as much out of their customers as possible through hidden commercial contracts. The question, then, about how to resolve land claims comes down to this: remove the people and the commercial rules that set up the so-called treaties in the first place, and then begin a fair and balanced negotiation through a truth and reconciliation process. 21 years later, to think where Canada might be today had Canadians removed this root source of all the problems in the country. Downey's work in support of Canada's Indigenous people is called Secret Path, and the website secretpath.ca will be in the show summary for this story for those wishing to learn more. Over to some science-related news now, and we look at a science-based story that has links to the disclosure movement related to the existence of life and advanced technologies from beyond Earth. In an article by Arjun Walia on September the 8th on the Collective Evolution website, Walia reports that a Lockheed executive has apparently revealed hints of government space travel, but more specifically linked to a growing science phenomenon known as quantum entanglement. The article writes that it's called quantum entanglement. It's extremely fascinating and counter to what we believe to be the known scientific laws of the universe. So much so that Einstein himself could not wrap his head around it. Although it's called quantum entanglement, Einstein referred to it as spooky action at a distance. Recent research has taken quantum entanglement out of the theoretical realm of physics and placed it into one of the verified phenomena. An experiment devised by the Griffith University's Center for Quantum Dynamics, led by Professor Howard Wiseman and his team of researchers at the University of Tokyo, recently published a paper in the journal Nature Communications, confirming what Einstein did not believe to be real: the non-local collapse of a particle's wave function. And this is just one example of many. They did this by splitting a single photon between two laboratories and testing whether measurement of it in one laboratory would actually cause a change in the local quantum state in the other laboratory. In doing so, researchers were able to verify the entanglement of the split single photon. Longtime listeners will already know of this phenomenon as it was explored in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? It has also been explored in a video clip by a cartoon character called Dr. Quantum, as he explains the idea of entanglement, and here some listeners may value from this explanation.
Great-great-granddaddy of wacky quantum weirdness is entanglement. If time reversal symmetry destroys the notion of time, then entanglement crushes our experience of space. Two objects, two electrons created together, are entangled. Send one to the other side of the universe. Now, do something to one, and the other responds instantly. So, either information is traveling infinitely fast, or, in reality, they are still connected. They are entangled. And, since everything was entangled at the moment of the Big Bang, that means everything is still touching. Space is just the construct that gives the illusion that there are separate objects. Are we far enough down the rabbit hole yet?
The article specifically goes into revelations by a former executive from Lockheed Skunk Works, a more secretive branch of the aviation company. What he shares, when it becomes mainstream knowledge, will radically change our knowledge of the universe, multiverse, and omniverse as we currently think we understand it. The article writes, Ben Rich was the second director of Lockheed Skunk Works from 1975 to 1991. He's been called the father of stealth, having overseen the development of the stealth fighter, the F-117A Nighthawk. Before his death, Rich made several shocking open statements about the reality of UFOs and extraterrestrials. The following is an interview with Jan Harzan of the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON as it is known, and he details information he received from Ben Rich while attending his presentation. The sound quality is poor, so you'll have to really listen, and I apologize for this.
There were about 200 people in attendance. We sat in the front row, as I recall, and we listened to about an hour and a half of Ben Rich talking about his 40 years at Lockheed Skunk Works. He had just retired as the past chairman and president, CEO, and chairman of Lockheed Skunk Works. He was just sharing slides from YouTube, everything from YouTube all the way up until, I believe, the F-117. And so this was about 30, 40 slides. He was showing a lot of different aircraft that they had built at the Skunk Works. But when he finished, the last slide was a black disc zipping off into outer space. This is a slide, so we kind of have the artist's swoosh marks on it, zipping off into outer space. And he ended the talk with the words, "We now have the technology to take E.T. home." And the entire place busted up laughing. And Tom and I just looked at each other like, did he just say what we think he said? Because Tom and I had done our own trips out to Area 51 together in a van and stayed overnight and observed some pretty interesting things. So we said, we've got to find out more about this. So there was a polite Q&A session, and then the meeting ended. And about 25 people followed him up to the front of the room to kind of gather around him after it was all over and to talk. And he basically had these conversations with people. And so it started off very polite questioning, and it turned to more direct questioning. Like, you mentioned this ability to take E.T. home. Can you tell us more about that? And so he basically said that there's an error in the equations, and it was plural. We've discovered what it is, and we now have the technology to travel to the stars. We'll take E.T. home, by the way he actually said it. He wouldn't quite go into any more detail. I mean, I asked him once or twice, like, how does it work? He didn't really want to go there. After it was all over, he turned around and said, I can go now. There were maybe down to about 8 of us. And he started to walk away, and I followed him. He was walking to his car. I followed him in the room, and I said, "Mr. Rich." And he turned around and looked at me and looked me up and down. "Who are you?" And I said, "Hi, I'm Jan Harrison. I'm an alumni." I said, "I have a real fascination with what you were talking about." I said, particularly the propulsion side of this thing. I said, "Can you tell me how it works?" And he said, "Well, let me ask you, how does ESP work?" And I took about 2 steps back, and I thought, I wasn't expecting a question. I was looking for an answer. And I just quipped real quickly. I said, "I don't know, all points of space and time are connected." He looked at me and said, "That's how it works." He turned around and walked out of the room. So, I mean, those are the three biggies that he talked about. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff he talked about, but it's basically, we now have the technology to take ET home. Number two, there's error in the equations. And I'm thinking that's Maxwell's equations, but I don't know. I even asked him which equations, and he wouldn't tell me. And third thing is that it basically works via ESP, is however ESP works. Now, it works all points of space on connected. I think that's the key to this thing.
In case you missed it, the answer that Rich hinted to Harzan is that interstellar travel operates on equations that function similarly to ESP, and that all points in space and time are connected. Have we been given a hint of this, perhaps, over the last few years? CVN has often suggested that Hollywood movies have hints of truth, and many already know that a lot of information about the future has been hinted at through Gene Roddenberry and the various Star Trek movies. In the first movie of the rebooted Star Trek in 2009, there is a scene where the young cadet James Kirk meets Ambassador Spock from the future, and together they both meet Montgomery Scott, who would later become the engineer of the Starship Enterprise. Ambassador Spock gives Scotty a gift from the future, a correction to a space-time calculation for transwarp beaming from one location to a moving secondary location, a calculation that Scotty had been working on.
The notion of transwarp beaming is like trying to hit a bullet with a smaller bullet whilst wearing a blindfold, riding a horse. What's that?
Your equation for achieving transwarp beaming.
Imagine that. It never occurred to me to think of space as the thing that was moving.
This may have been a subtle hint mixed in with entertainment that an error in a calculation has now been identified, and it has the potential to get ET home, as Rich and Harzan just noted. It is perhaps even possible that ET help, or help from people in the future, contributed to solving these calculations. Soft disclosure appears to be continuing at a very rapid pace for those who are ready and willing to look for the information. Careful discernment is always required, of course, because there are cabal sources deliberately mixing good information within the bad information to slow the process down as much as possible. As Walia wrote in his own article, interesting to think about, isn't it? Perhaps the vast distances that exist between planets and solar systems and more isn't really as much of a barrier as we thought it was. The questions always seem to come back, therefore, to who are the people creating the barriers limiting human potential and progress, and why are they doing it? As we get closer and closer to the root source of all the problems in the world, the solutions seem to become easier and easier. It is just up to the people to act on what they are now seeing as truth in the world. Finally, in health-related news, a few months back, CVN aired the story of the scam of the diamond industry and how one company, De Beers, is basically controlling the supply and demand of diamonds while marketing them as luxurious affirmations of love, when the stones are in reality being priced artificially high while also keeping the resale price of diamonds intentionally low. The practice is more common than one may want to know, and this week CVN has apparently found another culprit, and this culprit controls eyesight, or at least one has surrendered one's eyesight to the power of this company. A YouTube video by Adam Ruins Everything and posted on September the 14th offers a humorous skit to help explain. The video starts after Adam has entered an eyeglass store and is offered several trays of glasses from which to choose.
What do you got for me?
Well, we have a number of new styles to show you.
So many styles. How do I choose? Ooh, flirty. Classic. Tray fashionable. Daring do.
Actually, all these frames are exactly the same.
Ah! I'm sorry. She's a contacts person. She doesn't understand us. These are clearly different brands.
No, they're not. I'm the Adam now. Think about this for a second. Even the most basic pair of glasses can cost around $400. That's as much as my phone. Haven't you ever wondered why a simple piece of plastic is the same price as this miracle of technology?
No, and you can't make me. I love glasses too much.
Ooh, the power of knowledge. 80% of glasses and sunglasses brands are controlled by a single company, Luxottica.
But that would give them a virtual monopoly over the entire industry.
Bingo. And because they control both the luxury brands and the cheap brands, they can charge whatever they want for either.
No, I'm not seeing this.
I'm sorry, you have to. Luxottica uses that power to drive up the price of glasses for everybody, sometimes charging as much as 20 times what they cost to produce. Alright. And it's not just prescription glasses. Ray-Bans used to be bargain mass-market sunglasses worn by everyone from jazzmen to presidents to President Jazzmans. But in 1999, Luxottica bought the brand and raised the price to over $150 a pair. Quintuple what they were.
Maybe they're 5 times better at banning Rays now? Get out of here, Ray. You're banned.
Oh, the ideas your hair has. 70% of Luxottica's brands come from the exact same factory.
This one's Prada. This one's Nada.
Hey, this is just like what you did with clothing outlets. Ooh, this is karma.
I hate this. Glasses are really important to me. They're like 40% of my personality.
Oh, suck it up.
You know we don't have to teleport everywhere. We can walk around the store.
Why?
Well, I'm a smart boy, and I know what to do. I'll just go to a different store.
Good luck.
What is happening?
It's simple. Luxottica also owns almost all the major glasses stores, too, including LensCrafters, Pearl Vision, Sears Optical, Target Optical, and Sunglass Hut. Which means that the few brands that they don't own are forced to obey their demands. When Oakley tried to dispute Luxottica's pricing, Luxottica retaliated by dropping them from all their stores. Oakley's stock price collapsed, and Luxottica swooped in and bought them out. Luxottica has so much power that when a company didn't play by their rules, they brought them to the brink of destruction, then took over that company.
I've never felt bad for someone wearing Oakleys before.
Oh, I still get plenty of action.
Wow, I know you're not the bad guy, but you are real unlikable.
Now, whatever, tits.
But I have to wear glasses. I don't have a choice.
Good point. For 75% of Americans, glasses are a medical necessity. Too bad Luxottica also owns the second largest eye insurance company in America. That means it's possible for your optometrist, your insurance company, the factory that makes your frames, and the store that sells them to you to all be owned by the same company.
So they can just rip us off?
Everything is worth what people are ready to pay, huh?
Okay, that's awfully cynical.
Yeah, and it's also a real thing that their CEO said to 60 Minutes. The fact is, most of these glasses could just be labeled Luxottica, but they're not, because what Luxottica is really selling you is the illusion of choice.
According to a Wikipedia page, the following is reported about Luxottica. Luxottica Group S.p.A. is an Italian company and the world's largest eyewear company. As a vertically integrated company, Luxottica designs, manufactures, distributes, and retails its eyewear brands, including LensCrafters, Sunglass Hut, Pearl Vision, Sears Optical, Target Optical, EveMed, Vision Care Plan, and Glasses.com. Its best-known brands are Ray-Ban, Persol, and Oakley. Luxottica also makes sunglasses and prescription frames for designer brands such as Chanel, Prada, Giorgio Armani, Burberry, Versace, Dolce & Gabbana, Miu Miu, Donna Karan, Stella McCartney, and Tory Burch. The list of Luxottica shareholders with more than 2% of holdings represented by voting shares as of December 23, 2014, are Delphin, SARL, with 66.5%, Deutsche Bank Trust Company with almost 7.5%, and Giorgio Armani with almost 5%. According to Bloomberg, Delphin SARL, the major shareholder, is based in Luxembourg, and there is no published list of key executives of the company. This may or may not change the fact that you need or want glasses, but it may change the choices you make as far as the price you pay is concerned. Eyeglasses do not make your vision better. Reports have suggested that eyeglasses make vision worse over time, so that new prescriptions are always required, although many doctors will dispute this. Therefore, one's own discernment is required. There are exercises that one can do that may help to retrain the muscles of the eyes. Before one considers eyeglasses, one may wish to explore a series of exercises to help strengthen all the muscles of the eyes, especially if your eyes are focused on one distance, such as a computer screen, day in and day out, over weeks and years. When working excessively at a computer with a fixed distance away from the eyes, it's always good to take frequent breaks and allow your eyes to wander around and focus on different distances, near and far, to keep the eye muscles strong. Some sources have reported changes in vision as being linked to a range of what some people are calling ascension-related symptoms. Over the last few years, CVN has posted several articles dealing with various symptoms that are apparently preparing our physical bodies for a shift into a higher vibration and or frequency, and also apparently into a more crystalline form. A recent article, however, on September the 11th by Michelle Walling appears on the 5in5D website, and it explores a new series of symptoms that some may be experiencing. Walling writes the following: energy shift symptoms have changed since last year for many people. As we undergo the beginning phase of a wave of energy like we have never felt before, the body has to adjust itself to be able to resonate with the frequency that the Earth is receiving. Those who have been on the awakening path for a while are experiencing new symptoms with this new wave of energy. Basic energy shift or ascension symptoms included things like ringing in the ears, intense sweating, dizziness, forgetfulness, ascension flu, depression, and waves of nausea. It seems that most people who begin the shift into a higher frequency experience these same symptoms physically, while their team helps them to begin to turn the dial up a little at a time in frequency. Walling continues, lately, many people are reporting a batch of similar advanced symptoms, meaning those that have already served their time with the basic symptoms they never thought would end are now experiencing a whole new phase. Some symptoms in this new batch are extreme lethargy, feeling like you're drugged, gut pain and bowel explosions, bad moods when you are supposed to be happy, ravenous eating or no appetite at all, no normalcy with appetite, in other words, no motivation to do anything but lie around, either sleeplessness or sleeping all the time, not your average 8 hours, off and on. Sometimes 3 to 4 hours of sleep is enough. However, the next week, you're feeling like you need 12 hours. You may be having a sore throat. You may be experiencing itchy skin or even breaking out in hives. For those who have been experiencing symptoms over long periods of time, a year or more, then those people may be able to better see the progress being made, even though it may have felt terrible at the time. Others are having to go through much more in a much shorter period of time. And for them, these shifts will feel much more intense, and in some cases, perhaps even painful, such as with migraine headaches. Walling adds that I have had the extreme lethargy for a couple of months now, and can go up to 2 weeks with feeling like I have no motivation to do anything. It is very noticeable when this breaks, as all of a sudden I will have more ideas for articles than I can keep up with, and more energy to do things. This is certainly something that I can relate to personally as well. The bowel explosions, Walling continues, that some are experiencing start with severe abdominal cramps and then move to a big release in the bathroom. While this may be triggered by a certain food that you ate, it is still releasing stuck energy in more ways than one. Toxins accumulate in the bowel walls, and these aren't compatible with the new energies. Anger and negative emotions are also stored there. This area is also tied to the solar plexus, which is really being affected at this time. So although you may chalk it up to something that you ate, somewhere, subconsciously, you are probably drawn to put that thing in your mouth so that you could move a lot of stuff out. Walling advises people to look at the foods one is craving and try to understand the particular mineral or vitamin that may be present in that craving, and then perhaps try to satisfy that craving with a healthier food. She ends the article with this: in the end, it's all about vibration. We are now in a month where the waves of energy are stronger than we have ever felt before. All of the symptoms that you have felt in the past have prepared you for this time. We have literally done something that has never been done before in an ascension as we move through physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental detoxification, all at the same time while staying in a physical body. Our consciousness level is increasing and our DNA is arranging itself thanks to the source field waves of energy we are receiving. When you look at what is happening right under our noses, energy shift symptoms seem to be well worth the discomfort. The article is in the show summary for this story. In this week's final words, although there are very clearly numerous geopolitical and geoeconomic events happening this month already that offer evidence towards the shift of human and planetary consciousness at this time away from the power of the global cabal, I also choose to offer some information that I know is meaningful to some, but it may not yet be meaningful to everyone. In offering it, however, it is my hope that some will feel called to come back and revisit some of the show summary pages for CVN from time to time and look at what was offered regarding the energetic changes happening and how they impact different people at different times, and how this is beneficial and necessary for not only the evolutionary growth of humanity, but for each individual in each particular moment of now. I have noted in recent weeks how time seems to be flying by so much more quickly now, and I'm not the only one who has noticed this. Many listeners are noting and experiencing the same thing. There are physical symptoms, some of which were just discussed, but also include other symptoms also. Lisa Brown, in an article appearing on the in5d.com website on September 14th, shares the following. Some may be experiencing deep emotional cleansings, some physical. Some may be in pure bliss, playing in their new earth realities, expanding and experiencing what is available. These frequencies are compressing so tightly lately, so strongly, so intensely, so deeply. The heart will be activated, cells will expand, and then strong compression to squish everything that's ready to be released. Expansion, compression, every cell working, crystals charging, vortices opening, then closing. I can feel, observe every cell as it works. Of course, this has been her own personal experience and may not necessarily be experienced the same way by someone else. She also shares that these last couple of weeks was about observing what was triggering and consciously clearing while holding the vibration of our new realities in place, not going back in our minds, in our actions, to old limited beliefs, not catering to the old judgments, limits, and lack that is available in every moment that one still focuses on it, and yet is no longer visible when one does not focus on it. This passage is huge, and we hold all in the highest regard. Everything is important and serves a purpose, until it does not anymore. Then its purpose is to bring forth the knowledge that we did not have before, as we observe it, to see what we could not before. There are always new realizations here. These frequencies realign all for us according to that which we hold, believe, know, what we are, and what we do. There are people whom our society calls healthy, who are very awake and aware, but these same people are ostracized, criticized, and labeled anything from being a lunatic to being a terrorist, simply because they demonstrate an ability to not be brainwashed by the sheep mentality of the status quo, and have learned how to critically question everything that is going on around our planet instead of simply trusting sources that share certain information. There are also children coming who are part of a societal grouping that some may call physically or emotionally challenged, or some even more, and with a more negative term. These include children who have been classified with labels such as ADD, ADHD, autistic, and others. An article has crossed my path that gave me an insight into these conditions, and I am not sure if I have ever considered these conditions in this way before. An article from September 2nd, appearing in the Stillness in the Storm website, looks at star children and how we can begin to recognize these so-called bringers of light. The article starts out with the following. There are new generations of children incarnating on our planet who are very different to previous generations. They have been given many names, such as indigos, crystal children, children of the light, rainbow children, or star children. The children are far more multidimensionally aware than what is presently considered to be the norm. Many have a deep understanding of their multidimensional reality and speak about helping humanity awaken to a higher state of consciousness. They may also be aware of contact with non-human extraterrestrial intelligence. I might add that there are an abundance of videos on YouTube now to support this claim, showing children performing incredible acts at ages where most would consider it impossible for them to do the things they are now doing. The article then adds that metaphysical groups have recognized these children and offered labels to explain the differences. However, some are labeled dysfunctional because they struggle to socialize or cope with the pressures and conditioning that modern society places upon them. These labels, ADD, attention deficit disorder, Asperger's syndrome, forms of autism, and dyslexia. However, these labels may stem from our lack of understanding of the way these generations operate or perceive reality. It appears that many struggle with the conditioning of 3D reality. Dr. Olson, a molecular biologist, calls these individuals letter people. She believes she is a letter person. For example, Asperger's ADHD, and she has explored her multidimensional and physical sensitivities from a practical and scientific perspective. As a molecular biologist, a scientist, in other words, Olson goes further than most scientists to comment on the idea of the soul journey and our ET connections. She was quoted in the article as saying that the programs such as ADD, ADHD, Asperger's, or letter people, I do not believe are broken, she is writing, or dysfunctional gene, or related to dysfunctional genes, but instead offering new multidimensional skills to prevent limited reprogramming of a third-dimensional reality. The letter people show an impairment in communication between the brain halves and thus use one side of the brain for solving the same problem. Although it is thought they are dysfunctional, however, it may be a way to free more space in the brain for solving difficult tasks. The Asperger part might be responsible for higher knowledge and not interested in traditional learning. She was also quoted in saying that it is not so simple as foreign DNA. It's a combination of genetically improved bodies in combination with souls from different places in our universe. incarnating in these improved bodies. The souls have different frequencies and vibrations depending on their evolutionary status, and that plays a role in activation of the DNA in that particular body. And this is Olson still writing. I believe we also have to take into account the collective soul of Homo sapiens. The letter people have above normal sensory cells on the skin. They hear above normal range. They are aware of minute differences in the shades of color than normal. Taste and smell are enhanced. They are sensitive to all frequencies and can be overwhelmed by sensory overload. Sensitive to radioactive radiation as well as energy fields and energy beaming from angry people or animals. What she seems to be suggesting is that these souls came into physical being with a particular experience that our society considers a flaw. But in reality, this flaw was the very tool by which these souls could stay outside of the sheep mentality education system and avoid being brainwashed by the system, while also helping to expose the truth about some things relating to health and to the dangers of vaccines. Now that global events are becoming so much more visible now, it is getting easier to become more hopeful, even though those same events are causing fear in those who do not understand what is unfolding. Therefore, it is up to those who do see the bigger picture to help people understand the truth of what is being revealed at this time. For those other people who are able to see and grasp the bigger picture, they will be called upon to interpret the events and put them into the larger context of how these shifts are changing humanity, our planet, and our existence as we currently know it, into an expanded version as a birthing galactic star nation. Create a wonderful week until our next Moment of Now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary available on the website. CVN can be followed through its Facebook page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that the planet does not need more successful people. The planet needs more peaceful people, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers of all kinds. Until our next Moment of Now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.